Alright, so since I want to wait a while before I go ahead and release 2 reviews of mine, and before I release my commentary quickie on D-Sponge Entertainment, since a certain running man is going to make an appearance in that video, and he says that he's going to write the thing he wants to say in the script for that video. In the meantime, I'm going to be making a countdown. Been a while since I've done one of those, am I right? But anyways, today I'm going to be doing a countdown related to Unikitty, a show about the same main character from the Lego movie who spreads positivity across her world and even to her enemies. Alongside her is her brother Puppycorn, her bodyguard Hawkodile, her scientist Dr. Fox, and her castle keeper Richard, and some of their slip-ups. I just want to make it clear that I really do like this show a lot. When I first watched the show at the beginning of 2018, my opinion on the series was really mixed. It was a series that I originally thought was in the same category as My Gym Partner's a Monkey. The series was just something that I could watch and just not react much towards. I thought that it was better than that show, but I had a similar mixed opinion on this show that I did for that show. But over time, Unikitty really did grow on me as time went on, because of how interesting the stories got, and how much I like the character dynamics. I wouldn't go and say that it's my favorite Cartoon Network show of all time. I definitely don't think that it's as good as, say, OKKO or Ed, Edd n Eddy, but it's one that I enjoyed casually watching. I'll definitely be saving my praise of the show for the best list, however, that's not what we're here for today. I'll say this right now, because Unikitty had 3 seasons and around 20 or 40 episodes for each season, there can be a particular point where the show does have its share of points where it missed the mark by a wide margin. And boy, there are many moments where it missed the mark badly, and that's what we are here for today. Quick disclaimer, each episode on this list are episodes that I dislike, not episodes that other people dislike. So I want to get this out of the way. If you like any episode on this list, that's great. You can like them if you want. However, I think that being honest is a lot better than disliking something because others dislike it. So take what I say with a pinch of salt. Here is a ground rule for this list, and the top 10 favorites list. In order for an episode to make it onto the list, the episode must either be 11 minutes or 22 minutes. It has to be in all 3 seasons of the series, and I'm not going to be including any of the stop-motion Lego shorts or anything left field and away from the show. I will be including a part 2 11-minute episode of a 22-minute episode on the next list, since that episode has its own title card. Other than that, without further ado, let's begin the list. So, with me doing a top 10 least favorite Unikitty episodes list, and with not enough episodes that are really bad, I end up having some interesting candidates for the list. Just a spoiler for near the end of the list, I'm not going to be giving out any honorable mentions, since there are only 2 actual candidates. What would have been number 12, Old Lady Bodyguard, is a boring episode that barely does anything of substance, that I ended up dozing out and looking at notifications on my phone, which is something that I've never done since being really bored with Rock Dog or Boss Baby. But there's nothing else to say about that episode besides that. And what would have been number 11, Time Capsule, is a special kind of bad that has a disgusting ball of garbage and one of the most underwhelming conclusions in all of Unikitty. But no, I decided to go with the worst of them all, and that episode is Delivery Effect. Now, for the first couple of episodes on this list, there are going to be episodes that I either think are on the lower end of bad, or I think are just bad. Because when you're making a worst list of episodes of a show that has a very small amount of episodes that you think are really bad, you need to search high and low for lots of candidates for the list. And that's exactly the case here. In the case of Delivery Effect, it is one of the most boring episodes that I've ever seen from this entire series. You know how a lot of people say that Seinfeld is a show about nothing? The Unikitty episode Delivery Effect is an episode about nothing. Well, saying that the entire episode is about nothing is a bold statement. Near the end of the episode, there's a plot point with Father Time and stuff, but for the rest of the episode, barely anything of substance even happens. So the overall plot of the episode revolves around Unikitty, Puppycorn, Hawkadile, Dr. Fox, and Richard waiting for their food to get to the tower, and that's literally it. The rest of the episode, besides the ending, is just the Unigang waiting on their food. There's nothing else in this episode to even keep your attention at all. The characters try to do other things, it's only a few seconds or minutes long. The characters try to watch TV, they're watching a show that involves food, which makes them even more hungry. And they check up on their food getting ready to be delivered to their house, it's still not ready yet. And I end up getting something to get my interest put back into motion, because this episode is so not interesting that it literally has the ability to slow down time. When I got done watching this episode, I didn't feel like I was watching an 11-minute episode like it actually is. Instead, it feels like it's double its length because it is that boring. I get that this episode is trying to be an entire episode that is filled with characters waiting on something, thus it's trying to give off the illusion that the delivery effect is also happening in real time, but just because what's happening in the episode is going slow, that doesn't mean that you have to make the episode a slog to get through. I mean, 4 episodes before this one, we had the episode Plot Device, which was an episode that was filled with exciting and interesting imagery, and while the characters in the episode were bored, the audience wouldn't feel bored. Well, at least not as much as in this episode right here. While I did think that episode was just decent at best, that episode had so much more to offer. It's incredibly ironic how I think that the episode where characters are bored so they use a plot device is more interesting than the episode where those same main characters are waiting for their food to be delivered. So I know what you might be asking me right now. If I think that this episode is so boring and it has a lot of similar problems with my honorable mentions, why did I decide to choose this episode to be on the list and not Old Lady Bodyguard or Time Capsule? Well, as I said, Old Lady Bodyguard was incredibly boring to me, but there wasn't anything else that I really disliked about that episode. And while Time Capsule was boring, it had a disgusting ball of garbage, and the action sequence at the end was underwhelming, it had nothing else that I disliked enough to put it on this list. Delivery Effect is on this list over Old Lady Bodyguard and Time Capsule because of its absolute slap-in-the-face ending. Despite the fact that I thought that Time Capsule's ending was an action sequence that ended up being a letdown, this episode has an ending that is a much more insulting ending than a letdown action sequence could ever be. Here's what happens. Unikitty gets an idea to use a time machine to go into the future so they could get their Chinese food faster. Dr. Fox pulls up a time machine, which Father Time immediately objects to. He asks them calmly to not use the time machine, which they don't listen to because of course they don't. They end up getting their food, but they forgot one thing when ordering the food, so Unikitty gets another idea to go into the past to also order the thing that they wanted with their Chinese food. Richard reminded Unikitty of what Father Time said. Unikitty says something that makes Richard say, "Go for it." When they go back to the present, their food is right, but they accidentally ruin time, which makes Father Time furious to a point where he wants to kill them. But Dr. Fox slows down time for 20 years, and when she finally normalizes time, she moves the others out of the direction of the fireball. Father Time then tries to fire at the others a second time, but this time Unikitty is the one who slows down time, which both times feel slow like the rest of the episode. Unikitty, after 20 years of just dancing next to a toy flower, decides to destroy the time machine, and we got an entire sequence of Unikitty saying to the others that she's sorry and that she vows that they'll all from now on be patient. Right after this, their Chinese food finally comes and everything that they ordered is in there. Father Time steals the Chinese food and they immediately order pizza. As soon as they say this, you might be thinking to yourself that they would stay true to their message and actually have the characters being patient and not wanting to go into the future. Do they actually do this? Nope. As soon as the episode comes to an end, Unikitty asks Dr. Fox about a spare time machine, and that's where the episode ends. So, the lesson that the episode taught, that the characters need to be patient and wait for their food, is now completely thrown out the window and history is now doomed to repeat itself. I understand that it can take forever for your food to get there, especially if you're hungry. However, there are options that can make the time fly faster and keep you occupied while waiting for something. I do that all the time by watching videos or playing a video game. I mean, in this episode, the Unigang only tries to watch TV or read books. However, why don't they try to play a video game? They have a video game system as shown by the episode The Zone. Though, I put this entire episode at the beginning of the list because while I do find this episode a snorefest that could barely hold your attention, there are some things in this episode that do make it somewhat tolerable. I like the whole skeleton joke where the Unigang thinks that it's going to take that long for their food to get delivered, but it turns out that the skeletons for Halloween wandered out of the closet, and Richard makes them go back into the closet. I like the fact that Dr. Fox has an angry side to her. I found that part kind of amusing, and I think that Father Time acting like a father figure to the other characters was kind of clever. But with that being said, because the episode is really boring, the message that it was going for is completely shattered, and I couldn't choose any other episodes for the list, as well as the fact that I find the episode the worst of the 3 episodes of the show that I find dull, this episode is on the list. Pool Duel. I'm just gonna start off this segment by asking you guys this. Do you ever have that one episode or TV show that you think had so much potential, but was squandered by one particular thing? I have a list of a few of them that I think had potential, but was ultimately ruined. Like, for example, the SpongeBob episode SpongeBob in Random Land, or TV shows like The Mighty Bee or Mighty Magiswords. That's exactly how I feel about the Unikitty episode Pool Duel. What the episode could have been about after the Unigang fills the pool with water is Puppycorn learning how to swim and overcoming that fear of being on the deep end near the end of the episode. And while that still happens in this episode, there is also something that completely ruins this episode all the way. Without this one particular thing, this episode might have actually been okay or even really good. It could have even been one of my favorite episodes. The problem, however, is that this episode, what might have been an adorable story about the others teaching Puppycorn how to swim, became nothing but a rehash of Beach Days. Because here's the plot of that episode and the plot of this episode. Beach Days. Master Frown tries to ruin the Unigang's beach day. Pool Duel. Master Frown tries to ruin the Unigang's pool day. Yeah, both episodes' plotlines are a little different, as Beach Days revolved around the Unigang trying to look for the perfect spot, while Pool Duel revolves around the Unigang trying to teach Puppycorn how to swim. But the episode makes it no secret that it really is just Beach Days sat at a pool. While the episode is nowhere near as bad as that episode, hint hint, this episode reeks of wasted potential, and while I don't think that Master Frown is as bad as he is in that episode, his presence in this episode is beyond unnecessary. I'm sorry I didn't go too much into detail with this one, but there really is that little substance with this episode. There isn't too much that I could say about this episode that I won't say with the episode Beach Days later on in this list. Other than the fact that this episode has a similar issue as the SpongeBob episode, SpongeBob and Random Land. However, Beach Days is already an episode that I dislike so much, whereas Pizza Delivery was an episode that I really do like. While I do think that Pool Duel is an overall better episode than Beach Days, that is definitely not saying much, and considering the fact that this is the first episode of Season 2, my favorite season of the show, I just need to end off this segment by saying this: worst season premiere in Unikitty ever. Pet Pet. To make this segment short and sweet to the point, I think that Pet Pet is the most overrated episode of the entire series. Do I think that it's the worst thing ever? No. I mean, it is only number 8 on the list. It is harmless and all, but to quote Just Stop on something, just because something is harmless, that doesn't mean that it's exempt from criticism of any kind. To be fair, I don't think that this episode is really that bad. In fact, without a particular problem that is really huge, I would have probably called this a meh episode. However, the ending of this episode baffled me so much that I had to change the rating of this episode immediately. Here's what happens. Unikitty and the others confess that they were lying to Richard, but it turns out that Richard knew that they lied, and soon afterwards, Hawkadile comes into the pet shop with Pet Pet supposedly dead. But Richard says that Pet Pet is a toy, but the others don't really listen to him at all. I know that this ending should be minor, and my feelings on the rest shouldn't be affected by this ending. However, taking everything else into consideration even, the characters were basically thinking that a toy that talks was an actual animal, when they should know what an actual animal looks like. Other than that, I don't really have much to say about this episode either. The episode has tons of parts where the Unigang's IQs go down a bit. Although, this episode is still near the beginning of the list because I do like the cute nature of this toy. The beginning song, Nature is the Place for Me, is really catchy, and while the Unigang's IQs going down is really baffling, unlike an upcoming entry, it's at least not used for malicious intentions. But overall, in my personal opinion, this is Unikitty's equivalent of You Are Rad from OKKO Let's Be Heroes, another episode that, while harmless, has baffling IQ lowerings of certain characters, and is another episode that I don't like, but certain other people do. Camp Unikitty. Okay, so we went from an episode that I think is overrated to an episode that, while I do still think is bad, is really overhated. I don't like this episode either. I mean, it's lower on the list than the episode that baffled me, meaning that I think that this is worse than that episode. However, some people would go as far as saying that this is one of the worst episodes of Season 2. And one person, before changing his position, went as far as saying that this episode is worse than a particular entry on this list that I'll be getting to in a bit. In some defense, unlike the rest of the entries on this list with the exception of the episode's ending, there's at least no malicious intentions behind this episode. as the episode is about Unikitty just wanting her friends to appreciate nature, and when something does happen to one of them, particularly Richard, she does at least make an attempt to apologize when something goes wrong. And when one or two of them have had enough of what nature is doing to them, she lets them leave at the very least. So while this is a major problem with the episode, it's very tame in comparison to other cartoon episodes and even other Unikitty episodes. No, my big problems with this episode starts to come in with the fact that it doesn't know whether we should find nature beautiful or gross. It's the exact same problem that it had with the episode Laser Tag. The messages that the episode continuously teaches over and over again kept getting contradicted and is constantly contradicted in this episode. Since we're not on that episode, let's get back on topic. At the beginning of the episode tries to convince us that nature is gross. Then in the middle, it goes back and forth saying that nature is beautiful, but then says that it's gross. And at the end, it sticks with what it said throughout about nature being gross. And because both of these messages are constantly clashing with each other, it keeps on showing the beautiful side of nature and then downright disgusting sides of nature, which is basically a visual representation of how I view nature. When it's not torn up or gross, it can be beautiful, but when it's the former, it's downright ruined right away, down to the fact that Richard is constantly being pestered by gnats, and even at one point, a giant fly. Just why? And even after all these moments, Unikitty still insists that nature isn't gross until the worst parts of this episode come near the ending of the episode, where she finally opens her eyes and sees nature for what it really is. And speaking of the worst part of the episode, let's talk about that real quick. I get what this ending was trying to go for. It's pretty much a play on the word Bigfoot. Hawkedial said that the others might encounter Bigfoot in this episode. Hawkedial was talking about Bigfoot as in encountering the actual Sasquatch, not an actual foot. In concept, it sounds like a funny joke. In execution, though, it is a disaster. Because the actual feet that encounters Unikitty and Puppycorn are absolutely disgusting because they have too much detail or look like photoshopped feet. The worst one being the first one that encounters the others, because it not only has too much detail, but the added bonus is that they made it to where it's covered in fungus and mushrooms. How they move too is just as bad, if not even worse than how they look, because they move in such an unnatural and uncanny way, unlike anything else that the show has ever done. And right at the end of the episode, Puppycorn somehow ends up in the middle of what the disgusting feet were doing, and he's covered in this green goo. Blech. But aside from the atrocious ending and the parts where certain characters feel miserable, there are some things that I'll give this episode some points for. Unikitty does at least feel bad whenever her friends are hurt, especially Richard. The animation, aside from those photoshopped feet, still has the show's vibrant animation as usual, and I do find the environments in this episode to be a lot more beautiful than usual, and this episode does also get some points of making it to the category of just bad because of the Nature is the Place to Be song, which was a song from Pet Pet. And I think that's a good thing too, as that was one of the few things that I liked in that episode, and it's one of the few things that I like in this episode. How ironic how this episode and the previous spot has that song that gave them some points. The Escape Room of Doom. Alright, so the first 4 episodes on this list I could just consider kind of bad or boring, and I probably wouldn't watch them again since there's very little substance to make a review for and even talk about in a list. That's why I went over them as quickly as possible with the exception of number 10. That changes now as I'm now getting into the really bad episodes of Unikitty. Like, these episodes actually do have enough substance to both make a review out of and talk in great length in the countdown about. So, this is the first Season 3 episode, and spoilers, is the only Season 3 episode that is going to be on this list. Why? Well, the reason why I waited until number 6 to pick a Season 3 episode for this list is because I think that Season 3 of Unikitty is the least contaminated season of the entire show. I thought that there were so little bad episodes this season that the worst that this season got before this episode was either being average or boring. This isn't my favorite season of the entire show, that would be Season 2, but Season 3 generally has the least offenders of the entire series, but had at least one episode that I think deserved to be on this list. I knew that this season was going to slip up sooner or later, but I had no idea that this season's slip-up would be this episode. This was an episode that I was honestly not expecting to dislike as much as I did, because the title of the episode really does sound awesome and would be enough material to make this a really interesting episode. Oh, this episode is interesting, alright, for all the wrong reasons. So here's a plot synopsis for this episode, or at least the best way that I could describe it. The Unigang see a commercial for an escape room on TV and assume that the Score Creeper is behind it. They end up going to this escape room building and see that the Score Creeper is working there, and assume that he's intentionally trying to capture others, despite him looking casual and harmless in this episode. And for the rest of the episode, they go into other escape rooms and destroy the things that belong to the building. No, seriously, that's exactly what happens here. In all honesty, the episode doesn't start off that bad. There was a particular joke that did get a chuckle out of me, such as the part where Puppycorn thinks that the cupcake from the episode Crushing Defeat is the Score Creeper, and he snaps at Puppycorn by saying, "That last one wasn't me." That was admittedly funny, but the episode immediately goes downhill as soon as the Unigang start destroying props that don't even belong to them, which completely opened my eyes and made me realize what the biggest problem with this episode is. The main characters are completely unlikable in this episode, and actually kind of stupid too, because to start things off, they obviously have a huge grudge against the Score Creeper, to a point where they don't even listen to him at all, and the stupid aspect comes from the fact that they don't see that the escape rooms are obviously fake. It's the exact same problem that Pet had, except none of them have any common sense in this episode, not even Richard, and at least Pet was harmless and wasn't being used for harmful intentions, which is exactly what this episode has. I get it. The Score Creeper has done bad things in other episodes. He trapped them in a board game, he trapped them in a laser tag arena, and trapped them in an RPG world. And I think that this episode is trying to do these things to have him get his comeuppance for what he did. However, in order for the comeuppance to work, you need to give the audience a reason to feel scorn for him in this episode. The things that he did in 3 other episodes are irrelevant right now. Maybe have the Score Creeper be a jerk to the others when they get to the building, or have him trick the others into going somewhere fun, but instead put them in the same escape room that appears in this episode. Don't just say, "He did bad things in other episodes, time to pay the price." Because in this episode, he's just a normal casual guy doing his job, nothing else. I mean, yes, there is one point where he does snap at the characters and starts going back to his evil ways, but that was because they literally destroyed things that belonged to the building. And they literally get him fired because they couldn't put their grudge aside. And before you say it, no. Them apologizing for what they did at the end does not redeem this episode at all, because they still got the Score Creeper fired because they destroyed the props that belong to the building, and the episode doesn't even make an attempt to have them make it up to the Score Creeper because of its beyond rushed ending. Speaking of which, This is something that I really need to bring up before this list comes to a close, and before I move on to the best list. While I do still like this show, one of its biggest double-edged swords is the ending that it usually presents. In a lot of other episodes of this show, with some episodes that I already talked about, and even some episodes that are going to be on the best list, the biggest problems that they often have are their endings. A lot of the endings in Unikitty often bring some points down, they end really unsatisfyingly, they drop a message that it was trying to teach, or end on a pretty depressing note. The endings of the episodes don't affect my opinion on the episodes by that much, but they do bring the episodes down a little bit because of missed potential. Although, there are just some points where my opinion on the ending of a certain episode is majorly affected by the ending. Case in point, the number 10 spot delivery effect. But out of every episode of the entire show, this episode is the biggest example of an ending affecting an episode that I've ever seen. Here's what happens in this ending. The Score Creeper finally finds the Unigang and scolds them right before his boss sees what happens and fires him, and the Unigang apologize for what happened. And instead of them ending the episode on somewhat of a good note, they ended off the episode with a generic horror game where the walls are covered in spikes, which leads to the episode becoming very unfinished. I get that Unikitty is a comedy show and that comedies aren't going to be as complex as things like Teen Titans or Avatar. However, even comparing this episode to some of its comedy peers, it really does not have an excuse. Big City Greens, which is also a comedy show when it did this kind of episode, at least gave it some proper closure. More specifically, the episode where Cricket ends up getting Gloria fired, at least ended with Cricket trying to make up for what he did, and that episode made it clear that Gloria got her job back. While in this episode, I have no idea what it was going for, and the episode does not make it clear if Score Creeper is either still fired or if he got his job back. You know, I think I know what this could have been better used for. Instead of spending the ending playing a generic horror game, the episode could have had the Unigang make it up to the Score Creeper's boss for getting him fired in the first place. Yeah, that would have made the episode's ending kind of generic, but even that would have been much better than having the episode end out on a whimper, and it actually would have made it a better way to end out the Score Creeper's appearances in the show. Yeah, that's actually another thing that makes this episode worse in hindsight. This is the last of the Score Creeper's appearances in the entire series, and my how his episodes went downhill badly. His first appearance was just kind of average, but it was the first episode, and the start of a show is a lot more weak in comparison to later episodes. His second appearance was also kind of average, not because of his appearance itself, but the messages that constantly clashed with each other. His third appearance was actually kind of good because the episode itself was actually kind of funny, and it actually gave me hope that his appearances would continue to get better. But no, this episode is technically a Score Creeper episode, and it's the worst and last of his episodes. What a whimper to go out on.